Hey there, everybody. Rafi Salazar from the Better Outcomes Show. And today on the podcast, we're going to talk about having those conversations with team members about whether or not it's time for them to move on, whether they're a good fit, how you can take care of the people that you are responsible or charged with leading, if you're a manager, if you're a practice owner, if you're a startup founder, whatever. So, talking about, is it time to move on? This came about, and I think I posted this on LinkedIn a couple weeks ago, maybe, and got some feedback in the comments, got some feedback via email, talked about this a little bit on another interview that I was on. And I thought, you know what? I'll just do a little expanded discussion so that we can, I can kind of clarify my points a little bit and kind of put a finer tip on this idea of, sometimes it's okay as a leader to tell somebody on your team that they should look at another opportunity. This is not because of performance issues or anything like that. I want to be clear about that. This is not having that kind of conversation. Like, listen, you're not a good fit. But this is about how do we lead as business owners, practice managers, founders of a startup or something like that. How do we lead our team members in a way that is truly human, right? So this came about probably because at the clinic that I run, I've had this conversation with three employees over the last probably year or so. And I've found myself saying something along the lines of, listen, I would be a bad boss if I told you to stay here. As much as we love having you on the team and working with you on the team, you need to take care of yourself, or you need to do what's best for your family. I totally get it. If there's anything we can do during the transition, let me know. And, sometimes this happens because of personal reasons. Sometimes it happens because of professional reasons. An opportunity presents itself. And I know as an owner or as a leader of a team, it's very easy to become defensive or to take it personally when a team member approaches you about potentially leaving the team, right? You're investing some time into building this culture, building this relationship, and it can be a blow if somebody comes and says, you know what? I don't, something's happening and I'm not going to be part of it anymore. It can be, that can be a blow to the ego for sure. But it can also just kind of take the wind out of your sails. Again, you're investing time and energy. If you're doing it right, you're investing time and energy into developing your team members. And sometimes that means they take another step away and out and away from your organization, right? The first few times this happened to me as a leader, I remember thinking like, was this something I did wrong? What am I doing wrong that people don't want to stay? And obviously, like, if you can, you should explore those questions, especially if you're experiencing like a great deal of turnover, right? People are churning, and you're having these conversations every month, every week. Typically, though, those people just leave. If you're doing a bad job as a leader, you're not having this type of conversation. You're getting a notification, an email, just so you know, I'm leaving in 2 weeks, or just so you know, this is my notice period. You're not having the type of conversation that I'm talking about, or I'm going to lay out here. So I'm going to back up and tell a story about when I was kind of this idea got put into the forefront of my mind. So the idea here is, 5-6 years ago, maybe more than that. Shoot, time flies when you're having fun. So I left the VA to do consulting. Talked about that before on the show back in 2017. So right now we're talking about 8 years ago. In that time frame, I was doing a couple different things. I was starting Rehab U, which was like my independent healthcare consultancy, kind of like freelance consulting in the healthcare space around patient engagement, patient satisfaction, retention, that sort of thing, which I still do some of that work now in a different capacity. And then I was taking this role as an associate or a consultant, independent healthcare consultant on part of a bigger project here in the state of Georgia. I was part of a core team that probably we had 15 or 20 people that made up the core team, and another, 15 or 20 that made up kind of our ancillary team outside of that. And we were doing all kinds of stuff, policy analytics. I was writing case management frameworks and protocols. We were doing provider recruitment and readiness for the state. I ended up doing a bunch of like telehealth work and virtual service delivery protocols and things like that. But in addition, I had also started teaching at the university. And I was teaching, evidence-based practice. I was an adjunct instructor on and off from about 2015 to 2020. And in that time frame, the idea was in the back of my mind that maybe I had a career opportunity in academia. Maybe I was going to be a professor. I'd always joked around with people, even when I was young, like, oh, maybe, not that I'm super old now, but when I was younger, I'd always joked around like, oh, maybe when I had more gray hairs on my head, I'll go and teach some. I enjoyed teaching. I TA'd in undergrad. I TA'd in grad school. It was just, I find teaching enjoyable. I love having students come through the clinic and the like, because I just like the interaction, right? So I'd always thought maybe that was going to be something that was on the horizon, but that was not going to be anytime real soon. Obviously, I figured I could do the adjunct thing, teach a course a semester, or teach a mentor research project here or there, and have it kind of fit into the professional life of a independent healthcare consultant, right? And one thing led to another, and a full-time faculty position came open at the same time that I was doing this really meaningful, impactful consulting work. And I remember approaching, at the time, my boss, the managing partner for the consulting firm, and said, listen, and I remember it clearly. So I called him. His name was Derek. And I called him and said, Derek, I got a question. And if the answer is, I don't want to talk about this right now, I totally get it. And the crux of the question was, at what point do you bet on yourself versus taking something that is a safe, stable, secure thing? And he said, tell me more. And I said, well, here's the deal. I love the work that I'm doing with the team. I know that it's contract work, and that it's, it's a state contract. So every year, with fiscal year, the question is the state going to renew this consulting contract, or is it going to go away? Like, that was a real possibility every year. Or do I take this position? I've been offered this position as a faculty member at a assistant professorship at the university here, doing teaching basically what is my zone of clinical work, both research wise, and I was teaching like mental health, psychosocial, and upper extremity musculoskeletal. If you want more about why those two disparate things, you can dig into I'll put some links in the show notes about kind of my varied background. And I said, so this is what's going on. I really love the team. I love the work we're doing. The work we're doing is really meaningful, and the team itself, I have really strong relationships with, and I don't want to leave. However, at the time, I had 3 or 4 kids, maybe 5, I can't remember. We're up to 6 now at the time of this recording. So I had 3 or 4, maybe 5 young kids, or maybe I had 4 young kids and 1 on the way. And this academic institution is offering me a full-time position with full benefits and all of that. And I just don't know. I feel pretty strongly and confident that I could do what I'm doing on my own. If the contract were to go away, that I could make a go of it. We've been putting money away. I've got, we had no debt at the time. Still really have no debt except for a little bit on the business. But that's kind of where I'm at. Like, at what point do you throw it all to the wind and take a bet on yourself, or what point do you take the safe, secure, stable thing? And I, was reaching out to this guy because we had conversations over 3 years subsequently, or previously, working together, me working as part of his team and his consulting firm, about kind of how he got started and the steps that he took and the risks that he took along the way. And he had four kids as well, and he was, talking about being a young family and trying to, balance the entrepreneurship. So we had these conversations over time, which is probably why I even thought to call him in the first place about something like this. Like I said, if you're not leading in this way, you're not getting this kind of conversation. You're just getting an email that says, this is my resignation notice or something like that, or getting called in for a conversation that says, I'm leaving. So anyways, we had this relationship previously where he was very open and honest about the way that he was managing the team, and it made it very apparent to me as a team member of his that he was looking out for our best interests. So I felt like I could call him and have this conversation. And I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, Rafi, I'm not saying this because I want you gone, because I love having you on the team. You're contributing a lot, but you would be foolish not to consider this opportunity or consider the offer. And one of the main things that he and I talked about over the next, it was probably 15 or 20 minute call. He was, we were all remote all over the place. We flew into the field office, once a week, once every other week to could kind of check in and run some meetings with personnel that we needed to meet with. Otherwise, we were all remote. So this is all happening over the phone. Spent 15 or 20 minutes talking with him about kind of the career goals that I had for myself, the priorities that I had as a father, as a professional, how those things melded or didn't meld, and the flexibility and the stability really of having a faculty appointment and what that would mean for my family long term, even after we were calling it the Georgia project was over, because we knew that it was going to happen sooner or later, right? And we had this real discussion about my priorities, my career goals, and how this team, the team that I was part of, that team, fit into that list or that vision for the future or vision for my life and my career. Now, luckily, it all worked out for me anyways. I feel like I was able to stay. I took the faculty position, which lasted, I always joke, like I had the shortest tenure of any faculty member. I think I took a full-time position in May, I think is when I started, and I was gone by August because we purchased the business and one thing led to another. But I was able to stay on with the firm while that transition was happening. So I was able to stay with that team and continue that consulting project until it was over, until the state pulled the plug on the contract. But the lesson from that conversation has stuck with me basically since then. This was 2020, so 5 years ago now is when I was having this conversation, give or take. I'm still learning this and trying to kind of incorporate it in my own style of management and leadership, but I truly do believe that that being a good leader, quote unquote, is essentially the same thing as just being a good person, right? Taking care of the people that have chosen to sign on the dotted line and work with you, right? For as long as they do. And that means being willing to have those conversations like Derek had with me about, listen, what are your priorities? What are your goals? How does this fit into that, and this team or this work or this project fit into those goals? And is it still a fit? Is it not a fit? I think a lot of times as leaders or business owners, we fear having those conversations because there's a legitimate chance that somebody says, you know what, it's not fitting anymore because of whatever reason. And I hadn't really thought about it until you had this conversation. And again, this is not about performance issues a lot of times. This is not like, listen, this is not a fit because you're not doing your job. This is like, listen, is the work you're doing still serving your greater purpose or your plan for your future or what you want to get out of your career or your life or whatever? But it really starts, in my mind, with looking out for what is in the best interest of those people on your team, even if that means that they end up leaving the team for other opportunities and other roles. So this happened, just maybe a couple of weeks ago at this point. Somebody came in and they said, listen, this is talking about our work at the clinic here. Yeah, I really like the team. I really love working here, but I'm looking for benefits because we're thinking about starting a family, yada, yada, yada. And if I work at the hospital, they've told me that if I work 6 months full time at the hospital, I can drop down to part-time or PRN and still maintain access to the benefits. And I just don't know what to do, because I feel like, I want to work here, but I also want benefits. And, you know, how do we make this work, basically? And I said, well, listen, here's the deal, right? You have to look at all of the opportunities you have in front of you, look at your career goals, but then your life priorities, right? How does that fit in your life priorities? If priority is, starting a family, and that means needing health insurance and needing benefits, and this opportunity is presenting itself that will basically give you a 6-month run of full-time work, not part of this team, but full-time work that ends up giving you access to benefits later, I'm going to tell you what a former boss of mine told me, that you would be foolish not to look at it. And that's how the conversation went. And I said, listen, I'll be more than willing to support you in any way that you need. But it sounds like this is an opportunity that you should not take lightly, and I would strongly consider it. And this team member ended up, deciding to leave. And, as painful as that is, as difficult as it is for the team in general, for all of that, like it's the right thing for this person and their family, and their goals and priorities for the life. And it's my job, I see it as my job as the leader, to really make sure that they're in a position to realize those goals and priorities, right? Sometimes that means they can do that here with us. Sometimes it means, this is a stepping stone to something else, or this is somewhere else that they're going to another opportunity or something. So I remember reading a book. It's actually it's right there. It's called The Business of Expertise by David C. Baker. And he mentions it in The Business of Expertise, but he also has another book that I don't even know if it's in print anymore. It's called Managing Right for the First Time. And I do have that one right here, actually, Managing Right for the First Time. And in that book, he talks about this idea of, in 20 years, the clients that you work for right now, that you're working with right now, won't remember you. I mean, they might remember the firm name, they might remember you as a person, but they're not going to remember the ins and outs or the details of that engagement or the product or the deliverables or the impact, really. A lot of times, anyways. They're going to remember some generalities. But the people who do remember you 20 years from now are going to be the people that you led, and the people that you managed, and the people that you worked with every day, that you spent 8 hours a day with in the office, right? And his point was that we would be better business owners, operators, managers if we really spent time focusing on that fact, that the biggest impact we have as leaders of a team is on the lives of the people that we're leading, the team members the team that we were assembling and putting together and working around. So I've been thinking about that on and off over the last probably 6 or 8 months, after having a couple of these conversations and trying to, kicking myself at times, is that the right thing to do, or checking myself at times. It obviously hurts the business if somebody leaves, especially a key team member, but is it the right thing for that individual? And how do you manage that? And I kind of came to this conclusion. I wrote it down in the LinkedIn post, so I'm just going to read it. But I kind of came to this idea that if you want to have an impact on your industry, which is hopefully what all of us as leaders want to do, perhaps the way to do that is by being a good leader to your team and then letting them spread their wings, and hopefully they'll create positive waves wherever they end up, right? I think a lot of times in healthcare in particular now, shifting to kind of the big industry of healthcare and kind of the monumentous task it is of, making a positive impact in it. I've done some things. I've written the book. I've taught a whole bunch of students. I obviously run the practice. I work with clients across the country, really across the world, that are bringing products to market here in the U.S. I've done a lot, but in my mind, when I think about the impact that I'm going to have on individual patient lives, the biggest impact that I have are the people that I've worked with. Both as a leader in the clinic, for example, but then also I think about teaching. That's one of the big things that I loved about being a university professor, is you were in a way shaping the next generation of professionals, of clinicians that were going to go out and treat who knows how many patients, over the course of their career. So in my mind, yes, we need to be having those conversations with our team members regularly about like, okay, these are your goals. How are we as a team or we as an organization helping you achieve those goals? Is it the right time to think about taking another step into another role or another opportunity? Is that something you can do here at this organization, or is this something that maybe you need to go outside of? Maybe you do need to take a position at the hospital or another firm, or start your own business, or whatever it is. I remember also having this conversation with Derek, that same boss of mine, around that same time, around the idea of starting a business and buying a business and all of that. And it was about the time that the consultant contract was going away, and we were having this conversation again about betting on yourself versus a safe, stable, secure job. And I said, this is an opportunity. I think I'm going to take it. And we had another conversation about like life goals and starting the business. And he kind of, at the time, we had some other projects that we were working on together outside of the original consulting contract. So we knew we were going to see each other more. And I remember him saying something that was like, listen, if you ever need help with anything, starting the business, managing this, whatever, just reach out to me. And I knew that was not an empty promise or an empty offer, right? Like I knew, and I did for a while there. There were times when I called him and said, listen, how do you do XYZ? Or what did you do about this? What did you do about that? And having the ability to have somebody that I knew was in my corner, even if it meant doing something that was outside of their organization or something else, meant a lot to me personally. But then it also gave me some confidence too. Like, okay, this person believes in my ability to take this step, to take this risk, to do whatever. And a lot of times I always say, like, I'm where I am today because of the people that I worked with and the people that I worked for over the years leading up to this, right? And I think that that's ultimately my goal as a leader too. Like, I want to make sure that wherever my team members land, whether that be in our organization growing or starting their own thing or doing something else, that I've had the ability to positively influence them in a way that means they're going to go out and make great waves, or positive waves wherever they end up, right? So anyways, just a short little thought there on the idea of having those conversations with team members about their goals, their priorities, being a good leader through transitions. Basically just a recap, like try not to take it personally, and then look at it objectively as somebody who's looking out for the best interest of that team member. Because if you look at something realistically, you can say, oh, you know what, I totally see the points. I can see why this would be a good move for you. And sometimes team members just are not willing to, they know, maybe they have an intuition of what a good move would be for them in their career, but they're worried about letting you down, about letting the team down, about whatever. And this was a piece of advice that was given to me by a colleague at the university, which sounds like an insult, but I knew that it was not at the time. I was talking about leaving the department. I just signed on as an assistant professor, and this opportunity to buy the clinic came up, and I was talking about leaving. And this person said to me, she said, listen, this might sound like an insult, but it really gave me a lot of peace when I was considering something similar. So it was something that their boss had said to them, and it was basically like, nobody is irreplaceable. And what that meant was, like, listen, and especially in a tight-knit team, it's very easy to feel like I'm letting the team down, they'll never recover from me leaving. But the reality is there's going to be somebody that steps up or that they bring in that might do it differently than you. They might have different skill set. It might be maybe they're less proficient in one area but more proficient in another. They're going to bring their own thing to the team. But the team will move on. The organization will move on in spite of your absence. Not because of it, obviously, if you're doing a good job. But that, to me, again, at the time, made me feel pretty good about it. Like, okay, as long as you manage the relationship leaving in the transition in a positive way, it doesn't mean that door is closed in the future. Maybe I do go back to being a professor down the line. I don't know. Maybe I end up working with some of those colleagues on another project or something like that. Again, you never know. I've been back to that department Oh, countless times to do guest lectures on XYZ, technology and rehab, or, billing and running practice and leadership, all kinds of stuff. Simply because of the relationship that I had with the team members, and the way that hopefully the way that I managed that departure, taking the next step and all that for my career. So yeah, I think if I was to end on one thing, it would be, let's, as leaders, leaders in the healthcare space that want to make an impact, positive impact on patient care, on humanizing the healthcare process or service delivery. It all starts with running a team in a human way, right? Looking out for the best interest of those that we are charged with leading, or that have agreed to, to start rowing in our boat, if you would, and helping them, looking out for them as they manage their own career goals and ascension, to have real conversations about what the opportunities are at your organization versus other organizations, and helping guide them into decisions that are going to be net benefit, like the best option for them, not so much like a self-serving way of doing it, right? If you're a good person and you look out for if you just look out for the well-being of your team members, you never know how that might turn out for you down the line. Maybe it leads into another project or a partnership, or growth that you would never even thought of, because of the way you manage the relationship with the team member. So if you like the show, head on over to iTunes, leave us a rating and review, or here on the YouTubes, give us a thumbs up, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, all of that good stuff. If you want a copy of the book, Better Outcomes, A Guide to Humanizing Healthcare, you can find that at book.betteroutcomes.show. It'll take you a link to, the publisher tells me to send people to Amazon, so that's where it'll send you. It's available in print and on Audible. And I want to say we've done a couple episodes over the years of like reading a chapter. Maybe it was just the intro. I don't know. If you want to find more episodes of the show, head on over to www.betteroutcomes.show. Find the backlog of cataloged episodes. All the show notes have links to our guest bios and their LinkedIn if they've got them, or how you can connect with them and all of that. So until the next time, folks, be safe, be healthy. I will talk to you then.